The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 22nd chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Then the Pharisees went and deliberated together about how to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one. For you do not see the outward expression of people. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And then he said to them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" They answered, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. It was around the year 300, so about 270 years after Jesus was crucified and raised again. The church had been struggling for many decades, even over a couple hundred years, times of deep persecution. They had no institution like we think of it today with buildings and structures, but they continued to mostly meet in people's homes. Sometimes they had to even meet in secret. About the year 300, as the story goes, the emperor of the time was Emperor Constantine. Constantine was not a Christian. He would not become a Christian for many years. And there was a battle. Constantine was preparing for a battle, and he had a dream that night. And in this dream, he saw the sun. Now, he was a pagan worshiper. His god was a sun god. And in this dream, he saw the sun, but then, coming over the sun, he saw the sign of the cross. And he heard these words, "By this you will win." And so in the morning, he woke up and he told all his soldiers who had the sign of the sun on their shields to paint over top of the sun the sign of the cross, because he believed that he was given a sign that if he does this, he would win this victory. And indeed, Constantine did win that victory. And so he gave thanks to the Christian God for this victory. In many ways, on that day, the church, in fact, the world, but certainly the church, changed forever. Within a few years, Constantine would enact the Edict of Milan, it was called, where Christianity would be tolerated. Whereas before it was often persecuted, now Christianity would become tolerated. In fact, more than tolerated, Christianity would eventually become the religion of the empire. Not officially for a few decades down the road, but when Constantine wanted to build up his empire, he put Christians in places of authority. Partly because Christians could read. There was that advantage. Christians had their Bible and they were reading, and so he knew Christians could read. But he started to give Christianity kind of dominance in his structure and the way that he was building up his empire. Soon, buildings that were used for civic things like courthouses and so on became worship places that people would come to. They would start coming to church. In fact, to this very day, our worship space is built on the image, if you will, more of a Roman courthouse than anything else. A Roman courthouse would look much like this. At the front, instead of an altar, would be where the judge would have been, and sitting around the front, much like we have today, would have been the Roman officials. So when Christianity became the dominant religion, they took over that kind of style of architecture. Indeed, even the gowns that we wear were based originally on Roman court officials. This became a wonderful thing for Christianity in many ways, because the people could now no longer had to fear persecution. They could practice their religion out in the open. They could come to public buildings to practice their worship and their faith. And they were getting these wonderful positions in the government. They were starting to not only not have to be afraid of persecution, but they now became the dominant force in the empire. That's why it eventually would become known as the Holy Roman Empire. So it was a wonderful thing in many ways. In another way, it challenged Christianity and continues to challenge us today in just what is our role in society. When your faith is the dominant faith, when it's not only tolerated but lifted up, when you can get in positions of power because clergy, Christian clergy and Christian lay people support people in power, what does that say about our faith? I've heard it questioned, if Christians who go to church regularly every Sunday can't be distinguished from anyone else in the society, except that we spend some time together on Sunday morning, what is our faith really about? In many ways, this was the question that was being put forth to Jesus this morning in the Gospel, when Jesus famously responds, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is God's." It's interesting in that story, the Pharisees and the Herodians are plotting. They're trying to figure out how they can entrap Jesus. And so they come up with this brilliant question, a question that seems to pit the empire against God. Should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? If he says no, if he goes with the people who didn't want to have to pay this tax, he will continue his support of the people, but he will have Rome on his back. If he says, yes, you should pay the tax, he will be okay with Rome, but then he'll have the people on his back. He'll lose their support. It's an incredible question. And his answer, of course, is incredible too, and we've had this answer, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's, for years, and we've often thought about that as separating, church and government, or separating church and state. But that's not what anybody in Jesus' time would have ever imagined, separating church and state. There was no such thing. They were very much one and the same. What Jesus did, though, was an incredible thing, because he didn't just answer their question. He says, give to me one of those Roman coins. Give to me a denarius. And they do. Now, you have to remember, this continues to still be what we call today Holy Week. This still continues to be the days following when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey on Palm Sunday. And in those days following, you remember he turned over the tables of the money changers, and he got into these debates with the leaders. This still continues to be that same week. Jesus is in the temple. And when they hand him this coin, there might well have been an audible gasp among all the people who were watching. Because remember, there were money changers when you went into the temple, because you had to give them your Roman money and exchange it for temple money, because no images, no icons were allowed, no idols were allowed in the temple area. Very Jewish thing, right? No idols. And yet, somebody standing there in the temple where Jesus was engaged with these people were able to hand him one of these coins with an idol, with an image on it. Jesus almost didn't have to say anything else, because whoever handed him that coin, whether it was one of the Pharisees or one of the Herodians, clearly they were standing in the temple with their values being all mixed up. Either they were going to the temple for their justified, authentic, sincere religious purposes, in which case they would have handed in their Roman coin and exchanged it for a temple coin, or they were there just to be seen, because it was politically expedient to be there in the temple, in which case they wouldn't worry about what idols they happened to be carrying around in their pockets. But somebody had that coin, and just in Jesus, that coin alone was enough for Jesus to have won that argument. So we still stand with that same challenge today. What values make us Christian? From the time of Constantine on, it was enough to be baptized and say that you believe in Christian doctrine. But we're coming to see today that that's not enough. For too many centuries, Christian meant nothing different than anything else around us in society. One of the advantages that we have today of Christianity not having that same kind of dominant role in the society is that to be Christian is to actually make a choice, to actually decide, this is what I want to participate in. I believe in those doctrines, and that's why we say things like the Apostles' Creed. But more importantly, I want to live my life by Christian values. And when we really start to explore Christian values, we may find them very, very different than what society values are. I find it interesting that whenever I go to a family and they've asked to have a baby baptized, I always ask them why. I mean, you don't have to do it anymore. There was a time when you pretty much had to do it. If you didn't do it, your bosses would wonder why, your neighbors would wonder why, your family would wonder why. Nowadays, to not have a baby baptized is not going to affect your job, it's not going to affect your income. Really, nobody's going to worry about it. So I asked them why. And the answer is almost always because I want them to be raised with Christian values. And that leads to an interesting conversation, because what do we mean by that? And are those values that we learn from the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus comparable with the values in our society, or are they different? What makes us as Christians different from our neighbors and all the rest of society that isn't really too concerned about the Christian life? In Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, we hear the introduction to his letter this morning. And what he's really celebrating in them and trying to support them in is the fact that in choosing to be a follower of Jesus, at a time when there was no church building, there were no institutions, it was not at all a glorious thing to become a Christian, these Thessalonians had decided to follow Jesus. They made a choice. And they were constantly under pressure to return to the values that they had before. Paul wrote this letter to the Thessalonians to lift them up, to support them in the choices that they have made to be followers of Jesus. So what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus today? What would we be persecuted for living out those values in the world? What might our neighbors kind of wonder, what are they doing? Why are they challenging this that's happening in society or that that's happening in society? What does it mean to live by the values of Christianity today? That's something I hope to be addressing a lot more in the coming weeks and months and in the new year, as we think about what is our place in society, what is our place in Brantford, what is our identity as Lutherans here, what do we want to say to the world, what do we want to proclaim, what do we want to invite people into? And I can imagine one day having these values all over our walls, reminding us all the time. Maybe hanging from banners from outside so the world can see what our values are. So every time council makes a decision, we say, hey, is this in line with the values that we said we follow as followers of Jesus? So I encourage you, as we think about what does it mean to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto God what is God's? What are those values that we are rendering? Amen.